Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you for a meeting with Professor Jean-Pierre Cabestan, who is our eminent guest and who has a very long CV, so I will just choose some of the most important things. So first of all, he's now Senior Research Emeritus at the French National Center for Scientific Research, and at the same time he's Professor Emeritus at the Hong Kong Baptist University. He used to work for many, many years, so he's based in Hong Kong, also traveling extensively across Europe and based also in France. And he also works for the Asia Center at Paris. We had the pleasure of collaborating together during a Horizon project dealing with research in China that has finished quite recently. And Professor Cabestan also has worked for the German Marshall Fund of the United States, for those of you who know that this organization is doing a lot of research on China, so that is also quite interesting in this respect. So today's meeting with Professor Cabestan will be about cross-strait relations, about China and Taiwan, about Taiwan internal politics, and I have just received a gift from Professor Cabestan, which is his new book in French called Taiwan, Democracy Facing China. And this is a book which is for the general reader, so I think many of the things that we will be discussing here also can be elaborated or read more about in the book. So for those of you who read French, I recommend the book, and I'm sure it will be appearing in English soon. Any plans for that?
Not quite, actually.
Not yet.
Not yet. Well,
okay, but many of Professor Cabestan's book have been published in French and later in English. And if you look at the list, it's more than 10 books on China, Chinese politics, on Taiwan, on China-Africa relations, on many different topics which center around China, Taiwan, and also mostly political issues, but also social ones. So it is my great pleasure to welcome you, Professor, at SWPS University. Thank you for taking your time to arrive here, and I hope we'll have a interesting discussion.
well, thank you. Thank you, Marcin, for your welcoming words, and thank you for organizing this talk on Taiwan. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to that, and I have several questions for you, but later I also hope that we can have a discussion with people in the room. So if you have any questions on what we discuss here, there will be a Q&A at the end, and I hope we'll have a nice discussion in a broader group. So to start us off, I would like to ask you about maybe three narratives about what Taiwan is now. So first we have the Chinese official narrative from Beijing, and then we have maybe the KMT, the Kuomintang narrative, and maybe the DPP narrative. So if you could sort of step in the shoes of these three actors, so what Taiwan is now, what is it?
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a very good question, because we have to look at this issue from different angles. And of course, we should not ignore what Beijing, the Communist Party in China, and the PRC, the People's Republic of China, think about Taiwan. For Beijing, for the PRC, Taiwan is a province of China, which has been separated from the mainland since 1949, since the establishment of the People's Republic of China, because of the Civil War, and because Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang took refuge in Taiwan in 1949. So for China, and I think this point is very important, the previous regime of China, called the Republic of China, which was founded by Sun Yat-sen, Dr. Sun Yat-sen in 1912, came to an end on October 1st, 1949, when the People's Republic of China was created. So it means that for Beijing, for the Communist Party of China, there is no more Republic of China, called in Chinese 中华民国，没有中华民国，只有中华人民共和国。Only the People's Republic of China is the sole government, but also the sole state representing the whole China. So it means that according to the constitution of the PRC, People's Republic of China, Taiwan is a sacred part of the PRC, of the People's Republic of China. And that's the constitutional principle of the PRC and of the Communist Party, and that's very important to keep that in mind.
So even though the communists have not physically arrived
Exactly.
in Taiwan, they believe that because the Republic of China doesn't exist anymore, naturally the area occupied by the Republic of China now belongs to the People's Republic of China.
And so, yes, and it means that the People's Republic of China can exert sovereignty over Taiwan and the outer islands, Pescadores, Timor, and Mazu, which are islands located close to the Chinese mainland, but also under the administration of Taiwan and the Republic of China. So that's what the Communist Party believes. Now, the Kuomintang and Chiang Kai-shek and his son, and for a long time, as you know, the Republic of China on Taiwan was a one-party state until democratization at the end of the 1990s. Chiang Kai-shek himself believed that there was just one China, the Republic of China, despite the fact that mainland China was controlled by the Chinese communists. So it means that what Chiang Kai-shek did in 1949 was to transfer the capital city of the Republic of China on a provisional basis from Nanjing, which was the seat of the capital city of the Republic of China, from Nanjing to Taipei. So it was understood as a provisional move until they could reconquest the mainland of China. So it means that for Chiang Kai-shek, likewise, there was always there is only one China, the Republic of China, and that the mainland China is occupied by communist bandits, Gongfei Chinese. It's only in 1983, after the death of Chiang Kai-shek, Chiang Kai-shek, yes, died in 1975, that his son, Chiang Ching-kuo, decided to change the wording, the wording which characterizes the Chinese communists, from communist bandits to Chinese communists, from Gongfei to Zhonggong. And now, and even today, the Kuomintang, and so what we call in Taiwan the Blue Camp, calls mainland China Zhonggong, or the part of the Chinese nation of the state, the part of China which is controlled by the Chinese communists. So it means that the Kuomintang cannot recognize the People's Republic of China, because it still sticks to the one China principle, according to which the one China they promote and they believe in is a Republic of China. So that's where we are.
That's true until today?
Yes, it is true. And that's the foundation of the so-called 92 consensus, according to which there is one China, but each side of the Taiwan Strait has its own definition of one China is. For Beijing, of course, is the PRC, People's Republic of China, and for Taipei, for the Kuomintang, is the Republic of China.
Okay, so just to make it extra clear, so Kuomintang does not recognize People's Republic of China as a state?
No.
Okay,
for them, the whole China is the Republic of China. Of course, you can say it's a fiction. It's a political or diplomatic fiction. Now, the foundation for that principle is a very famous quotation by Chiang Kai-shek himself. Han Zhe Bu Liang Li. The good people and the thieves cannot stand together in the same room. So we cannot share, we cannot share the country with these bandits. Well, that's the principle, which is up to now the foundation actually of this one China principle. I mean, when I tell that to my mainland Chinese students, they're shocked, but they know it, they know the expression. But anyway, and the irony is that they like it because at least the Blue Camp in Taiwan believes in, and sticks to the one China principle. Now, for the DPP, the third major force in this equation, and the Green Camp, we call the Green Camp in Taiwan, the pro-independence camp, or what I would qualify more, because I don't think they want to declare independence because they believe that Taiwan is already independent. I think the pro-status quo camp, or the anti-unification camp, which I think is a better characterization of this camp. Now, the DPP has changed over the years. When it was created in 1986, there were two factions in the DPP. One which would give priority, which wanted to give priority to democratization of Taiwan, and another faction which wanted to promote independence. So you had two major factions at the time, the pro-independence faction, the pro-democratization faction. Eventually, in 1999, the DPP passed a resolution according to which Taiwan was already independent and its official name was the Republic of China. So it means for the DPP, it's very simple, it means since 1999, for the DPP, the Republic of China equals Taiwan. So this means that for the DPP, there's room to recognize the PRC as a separate state. So it's a de facto two-state or two Chinese states, or two-state theory, which is more and more obvious now because Tsai Ing-wen and later the current president William Lai Ching have promoted this idea. Lai Ching even more than his predecessor, actually. So that's where we are today. So that, of course, China doesn't like it because it's kind of a two China policy. And clearly it's a way of asserting Taiwan's international status and improving Taiwan's international status and ignoring this unification objective which has been promoted by mainland China for many years.
Can you explain to us the word independence in the Taiwanese context? Because many people, I think, misunderstand it when in the media somebody says that Taiwan should never proclaim independence.
Yes.
What does it actually mean?
Well, proclaiming independence in the current context will mean changing the name of the country. And I don't think it's likely. I don't think actually it's feasible for a number of reasons, for three reasons actually. And that's why the DPP has become more pragmatic in a sense and has, declared, as I said, more than 20 years ago, actually 25 years ago, 26 years ago, that Taiwan equal the ROC. Of course, they prefer, the DPP, have to be honest with you, the DPP prefers to use the term Taiwan than Republic of China. And what the DPP has done since after Chen Shui-bian got elected is to gradually change the cover of the ROC passport, the Taiwanese passport. In the past, you just had ROC, Republic of China, in Chinese and in English, on the passport cover. And of course, if you travel, the Taiwanese travel around the world, are you from China? Republic of China? You say, no, it's not the same. The PRC, the ROC.
A lot of confusion, yeah.
So they added Taiwan. And now Taiwan is getting bigger and bigger, and ROC is getting smaller and smaller.
Yes, I noticed that on the new edition of the passport, it's
there's
Taiwan,
been
Republic of China.
I showed that to Marcin because there have been 3 consecutive editions of the passport. It's quite interesting to see those changes. At the same time, they can't completely erase the Republic of China. Because, and the DPP has been clear about that, including William Lai Ching, is that the constitutional order of Taiwan is still based on the Republic of China Constitution enacted in 46-47 in Nanjing. And then with all the amendments introduced by Li Danghui and mainly Li Danghui and his successors in the following after 1991, 1992. So and then for 3 reasons, I don't think they can get out of the ROC, the Republic of China envelope, or constitutional envelope and name. First of all, it's China. Of course, China will be very, it will be a casus belli. I mean, it will be a reason for declaring war against Taiwan, to change the name of the country, replace, for instance, Republic of China by the Republic of Taiwan. And so that will be very bad. The second reason is the US. The U.S. is in favor of the status quo, will never accept. And that's sometimes the Taiwanese forget about, even China forgets about it. I mean, the U.S. for the U.S. is a non-starter. I don't think they will ever tolerate the Taiwanese to rock the boat that much and sort of create a situation which will be very dangerous for everyone, including for the U.S., which, will be maybe compelled to intervene in case of a war or extreme military tension. And the third reason is the Taiwanese. They're divided. The Taiwanese society itself is divided. Quite a number of Taiwanese still believe that the ROC should be the proper name of the country. Of course, they don't oppose the idea that actually the ROC is reduced today to Taiwan. So we can come back to that debate. So we should be careful about that. Now, the final thing is, because it has to do with the identity, there's all debate about the identity. And clearly the Taiwanese identity has grown to 2/3 of the society. I mean, 2/3 of the Taiwanese, around 60 66% of the Taiwanese believe they are Taiwanese, period. They're not Chinese. But you still have 1/3 of the Taiwanese who believe they are both Chinese and Taiwanese. So it means that the cultural identity, being Chinese, has not disappeared. And I don't think it will ever disappear. The Taiwanese who just believe they are Chinese, not Taiwanese, is a very tiny minority of the society today, clearly. I mean, for the reasons which are very obvious, that the ROC has identified since 49, since more than 70 years, nearly 80 years, the ROC has identified with the Taiwan. So the Taiwanization of the ROC was inevitable, I think, and it's a fact of life.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So we have the Chinese government that doesn't recognize Republic of China's government and doesn't recognize the authority of that government over the Taiwanese island and other islands belonging to today's Republic of China and Taiwan. We have the committee that doesn't recognize the communist Chinese government. So could you explain to us how did these two entities, so the communists on the mainland and the community, how did they start talking? I mean, what was the basis for the first meetings in 1990s, and how everything went into this sort of period of relatively good dialogue, and maybe how the dynamic changed, because it changed to and fro several times?
Actually, everything started, I'm tempted to say, everything started with Taiwan's democratization in 86, 87. Actually, everything started to change with Deng Xiaoping's decision to adopt a peaceful unification policy. Now, the peaceful unification or reunification policy, which was introduced by Deng Xiaoping on January 1st, 1979, actually was closely linked to China-US normalization.
Yeah, so we need to remind our viewers, so the 1st of January 79 is when China established diplomatic relations with the US, and at the same time US dropped diplomatic relations with Taiwan.
Yep.
So that was a huge change in the dynamics between the two places.
But US commitment to the one China policy was pretty ambiguous, actually, from the very beginning. There are two things I need to say. The first thing is that the US, if you look at its official statement, acknowledged the position of acknowledged that China's position was that Taiwan was part of China. Acknowledged the Chinese government's position was Taiwan was part of China. Acknowledged 人事道 is not 承认, is not recognized. Of course, in the official translation on the website of the Waijiaobu, the Foreign Ministry in China, they've translated acknowledged by 承认, which is a bit
clever,
which is misleading, but it's not anyway. So the first thing. The second thing is the U.S. understanding of that normalization is that China had abandoned its policy to use force, has decided to privilege a peaceful unification policy. Of course, Deng Xiaoping was very clear about and told the American, I cannot commit that he will never use force. Maybe in the future we will have to use force, and I cannot make such a commitment that we will never use force in the future against Taiwan. But I can make the commitment that our priority, our new policy regarding unification is a peaceful unification policy. So that's the first thing. For a number of years, Taiwan refused all these overtures made by China, and there was a 3-no policy, no compromise, no communication, anything, no dialogue. And eventually, with democratization, Zhang Jinggu, 1 year before he died, actually, decided to allow the Taiwanese to travel to mainland China for family reunion or for business, relations or business purposes. Before that, in Taiwan, if you went to China, you could go to jail. You had to be very careful.
Yes,
so
no flight connections, no posts,
and even
no direct relations
whatsoever. A number of Taiwanese went to mainland China after 72, 73 from the U.S., Canada, and elsewhere. But if Taipei, the Taiwanese government knew about it, they could get into trouble. So and that's the background. And then so they needed to have some kind of channel of communication. So how do you do that when you don't recognize the other side? There is one way. You use white gloves. Have you heard of 白手套? You use white gloves. So you establish a body, an association, which represents the government, which is not the government. So, and the Taiwanese were the first to do that. with in creating what has been called in English SEF, it's called the Strait Exchange Foundation. It's a foundation chaired by a very well-known rich person, actually, Ku Zhenfu. And a few months later, Beijing did the same in creating the ARAS, Association for Relations Across the Taiwan Strait, Haiqiewei. And so that was, so they had the organization in place. But then you had this question of the One China principle, which came up. And in November '92, both sides delegates met in Hong Kong, by the way, to discuss this One China issue. And so they agreed, but they didn't write anything. It was a verbal, it was a verbal agreement according to which it was One China. Beijing said, okay, there is One China, we don't get into the definition. That's it. And Taiwan said, there is One China, and each side keep its own definition of One China. 一个中国各自表述. So even on you know how you characterize One China, there was no agreement. So now we keep talking about based on that compromise, we keep talking about the 92 consensus. Actually, the expression, the 92 consensus was created way later. It was coined by someone called Su Qi, a Kuomintang official who happened to be earlier in charge of Mainland Affairs, relations. He was the head of the Mainland Affairs Council, Lu Hui. And so after the Kuomintang lost the election in 2000, they say, actually there was a consensus about the One China principle, and the DPP should recognize that consensus in 92. But the term consensus, 九二共识, was coined 8 years later, actually, by Su Qi in 2000. And since then, the irony is, since then, of course, the Kuomintang has kept promoting this 92 consensus, but Beijing picked it up. And now, if you find these 92 consensus in many Chinese Communist Party official documents, including in the resolution of the latest Party Congress of the Communist Party. So it tells you how official that expression has become on the Chinese side. It was something which was actually coined and created way later. But anyway, in '92 you had the foundation for those for opening that new channel of communication. Now, that channel of communication was established in '92, and that led to a summit in '93 in Singapore. In April '93 in Singapore, we got Ku Zhenfu and his counterpart called Wang Daohan, a very close former Shanghai mayor, very close friend of Jiang Zemin, the party general secretary of the time, and. But that channel of communication was created actually for sorting out technical issues, and it was very clearly already clearly said from the very beginning that political issues should be kept aside. So that these two associations, or white gloves, were not created for debating or for discussing or negotiating on political issues. That was not the purpose of these two organizations. So you have to be careful about that, because later, of course, China would bring up political issues, but that was not the purpose of these two organizations. That led to some this meeting in '93, but this meeting in '93 didn't. It was important because it was important it took place to start with. But that led to three documents, very brief documents. One on one regarding the registration of mail, the other one regarding the next meeting, and the third one regarding another technical issue. I forgot. I mean, this was about exchange of people, but that was very, very modest in terms of achievement. But it was important it took place, and those two associations still exist, by the way. But they are under they directly report to their own government. On the Chinese side, they report to the Taiwan Affairs Office, which is under the Central Committee of the Communist Party, but also under the State Council. And in Taiwan, the foundation reports to the Mainland Affairs Council, which is one of the ministry of the Taiwanese government.
Yeah. Let us jump a few years to the year 2000.
Yes.
That was a year where Kuomintang for the first time lost power in presidential elections. So Cheng Li-wun from DPP was elected, and it was the first peaceful democratic transfer of power on Taiwan. And then the dynamics changed a lot. If you could tell us maybe briefly about how the dynamics in cross-strait relations changed in these years until today, and maybe who was orchestrating this? I mean, what was the biggest influence, whether it was the outcomes of elections on Taiwan, the policies in the US, or some of the policy changes in Beijing?
I think I have to say a few words before moving to 2000 about Li Tonghui, because Li Tonghui was in favor of these new interactions between mainland China and Taiwan.
Let us maybe say a few words. So Li Tonghui was
the president,
Mr. Democracy.
Yeah, well, he was promoted he was chosen by Cheng Li-wun as vice president as early as 1984, and that's why he became acting president after Cheng Li-wun's death in January 1988, and was confirmed in 1990, and then he remained president until 2000. He was democratically elected in 1996 when the first democratic presidential election took place in Taiwan, and so at the beginning he was very much in favor of stabilizing and relations with mainland China, and but it clashed very quickly. Well, first with his own willingness to improve Taiwan international status, and maybe you don't remember in 93, 94 he wanted to return Taiwan to the United Nations. He wanted to, and that was the mission impossible. But China will of course veto that initiative. And then he was invited to the U.S. I mean, I don't want to get into the detail, but what I want to say here, he was very lukewarm about deepening too fast trade, economic, and people-to-people relation with China. So he launched a new policy called 阶级容忍. We have to be patient and take time. I want to slow down and that's why he sort of put an end to this interaction between the two associations. In 98, 99, particularly 99, when he declared this that relation between China and Taiwan was quasi state-to-state relations. So that's so-called 两国论. And that triggers small crisis in Taiwan Strait, and then I think it laid the ground to some extent to the Cheng Li-wun's victory in 2000, because the KMT was divided, and the division of the KMT sort of put two candidates in the battle. So it was a three-way election in 2000, and it's only a three-way election at the time which would make Cheng Li-wun's victory possible, because Lian Zhan was a bad candidate, but there was Song Chu-yu was a real contender of Cheng Li-wun, but Cheng Li-wun made it with 39% of the vote in 2000. So anyway, when Cheng Li-wun was elected, that was a big surprise for everyone, kind of a shock for China, but also a shock for Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C., via the de facto embassy in Taipei, it's called the American Institute in Taiwan, 美国在家协会 in Chinese, they put a lot of pressure on Cheng Li-wun not to rock the boat. And that led Cheng Li-wun in his inauguration speech in 2000 to make a number of commitments. 是不也没有. I won't go into the detail, but the idea that I will keep the status quo. I won't change the constitution. I won't even keep the National Unification Council, which later will freeze, but that's another issue. So that reassured Washington, but also Beijing. At the same time, he didn't went as far as some were hoping that to recognize the 92 consensus. He remained opposed to it, and one of his advisors who convinced him to remain opposed to it was no other than Mrs. Tsai Ing-wen, who was at the time head of the MAC, Mainland Affairs Council. So, because Cheng Li-wun was kind of hesitant about, whether they should go all as far as acknowledging the 92 consensus. So there were 8 years of kind of tension. Well, I wouldn't say tensions, but lack of direct relation. Cheng Li-wun made a few concessions, like opening the it's called in Chinese 小三通, the direct relations or links between Tianmen and Mazu and mainland China, which are outer island close to Fujian province. But that was a minor step. Actually, he was under pressure from the Kuomintang to do more, and the Kuomintang decided, and that was a big change in 2005. At the time, the president of the Kuomintang was Lian Zhan, to resume party-to-party relation with the Chinese Communist Party. After how many years? More than 50 years of split non-relations and very unhappy ending with 49, the end of the Civil War. So, and the idea was to try to propose another mainland Chinese policy, another policy towards China, with the opening of direct flights and so on. So, and in a sense, again, that 205 visit laid the ground for Ma Ying-jeou's victory in 208. So the return of the Kuomintang to power in 208.
So can I ask you, when you said about the white glove diplomacy, so these were two sort of as if social, civil society institutions, but in reality representing the states.
Government.
But Lian Zhan was actually the guy who started the party-to-party talks, because that's a very important development.
Yep.
Since you can't have state-to-state relations and you can't have government-to-government relations. That was another avenue for dialogue.
Yes, and the Communist Party was open to such dialogue with all the political parties on Taiwan who endorsed an ideological consensus, and that's not the case of the DPP. So it means that the new party at the time, and also PFP, the party promoted by Song Chu-yu, James Song, were also allowed to develop relations with mainland and paid visit to China.
Okay, as long as you recognize the 92 consensus, you can talk to us, to the Communist Party. If you don't, we don't want to talk to you.
Exactly, so that's a precondition, and that's an obstacle to any kind of dialogue between Beijing and Taipei when the DPP is in power, which is the case today. So, but Lian Zhan's trip, put quite a bit of pressure on the DPP, and clearly at the end of the Chen Shui-bian presidency in 2008, there was because one of the things I have to add something. Actually, Chen Shui-bian was not that clear in its as far as its mainland China policy was concerned. On the one hand, he refused to endorse an ideological consensus. On the other hand, and that's very different from Li Donghui, he allowed a lot of Taiwanese business people to go to China and to invest in China,
yes,
and to open companies in China, the so-called Taisheng. That's when the number of Taisheng, the number of Taiwanese business people in China increased very rapidly, maybe to 1 million. I mean, we have to be careful with those kind of estimation, but that's the time, 2000, when Chen Shui-bian. And that, of course, put pressure on the government to open direct links and direct air links between mainland China and Taiwan. And so what Chen Shui-bian did was to allow companies to start charter flights, particularly on the occasion of the Chinese New Year. But the direct links were open when after Ma Ying-jeou, the DPP, the KMT president, was elected as president of Taiwan in 2008.
So do you agree with as far as I remember? So actually, it's Hong Kong, Germany, the US that started investing in mainland China far before Taiwan, because Taiwanese businessmen were not allowed legally to invest in the mainland China in 1980s.
Yes.
So it's only in the 1990s when they started, but then Li Donghui was very careful about it. So there was not huge dynamics, and actually the person who was not expected to promote business relations, Chen Shui-bian, was actually the first president that really opened wide the road for Taiwanese business to invest in China and build factories in China.
From a historical point of view, the irony is that Taiwanese investments started to increase after the Tiananmen crackdown in '89, which is another irony, because that's really when it started to pick up. Yes, Taiwanese economy became under Chen Shui-bian more dependent, more interdependent with mainland China, so in Taiwan you had a number of companies and more vested interests, I would say, to stabilize and the relationship with China. And that's exactly what Ma Ying-jeou did between 2008 and 2016. But we can talk about that because it's another issue.
So that's the golden period for cross-strait relations? How do you view it?
Yes, in retrospect to some extent, but the problem is Ma Ying-jeou went a bit too far, and that triggered a movement which is well known, which is remember the Sunflower Movement in 2014. Now, the first term, the first 4-year term of Ma Ying-jeou was pretty positive in a sense, because you open the 3 links, or air links, direct shipping links. So it means you save a lot of time, because if you're in Taipei, you want to fly to Shanghai or Beijing, you don't need to transit in Hong Kong anymore. It's even closer. So it's very. And I fly quite often from Shanghai to Taipei myself. It takes 2 hours, and you land in Songshan Airport, which is sometimes you can't get the right flight. It's Songshan Airport, which is very close to downtown Taipei. Anyway. So instead of Taoyuan Airport, so that was an important change, and so what was interesting actually during the Ma Ying-jeou years is that so the SEF Arad stocks resumed between those two white gloves, but gradually actually you had more and more government people attached to these visits. And then sometimes you had de facto state-to-state relations between ministries, between the Ministry of Commerce with the Taiwanese Ministry of the Economy. So yes, you had still the white globe, but you could see a kind of quiet government-to-government relations taking shape. And that's what the positive side in terms of stabilization. Of course, provided that the Taiwanese government endorsed the 92 consensus, okay?
And then you had ECFA.
Yes, and then that led to the ECFA. In 2010, ECFA was, well, of course, the DPP criticized ECFA, was worried about ECFA, but ECFA was okay, I would say. Anyway, ECFA...
Let's maybe say what it was.
ECFA was Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement. Now, the important one is that agreement is framework. It's a framework, so you can put a lot of things inside. Okay, it was a half-empty framework in many ways. And then in 2014, the negotiators of both sides went further and wanted to adopted another agreement called the Service Agreement. And that Service Agreement, they wanted to convince the Legislative Yuan, the Parliament of Taiwan, to endorse it very quickly without discussing it too much. And that triggered a strong opposition, not so much from the DPP, but from the society, from the street, I would say. And that's the origin of the Sunflower Movement, which led to the occupation of the parliament, the Lifa Yuan, the Legislative Yuan, by some activists. And that occupation, of course, was facilitated by some people in the Kuomintang who were not very happy with Ma Ying-jeou, including Wang Jingping, who was the president of the Legislative Yuan, who belonged to another faction of the Kuomintang, and the Kuomintang, as usual, was divided. To put it simply, I tend to simplify things here. Wang Jingping was representing the Taiwanese faction of the Kuomintang. Ma Ying-jeou is a Mainlander. He was representing more a darker blue faction within the Kuomintang. And so that occupation was tolerated, actually peacefully facilitated by Wang Jingping. And so there was no bloodbath. Though when some of the demonstrators wanted to occupy the Executive Yuan, the seat of the government, things turned pretty bad because, of course, the police opposed the demonstrator. There was some casualty, no deaths, but it became a bit violent. And actually, the movement itself was divided, but whether it was wise or not to occupy or try to occupy the seat of the government, the Executive Yuan, Xinjiang Yuan in Chinese. So, but the result of that movement is that the service agreement was frozen, was not adopted, it was abandoned actually. So that was the limit which was reached in terms of how far it could Ma Ying-jeou could go in sort of establishing cooperation and kind of political détente with mainland China. Now, I need to finish the Ma Ying-jeou era with a few words about the summit between Ma Ying-jeou and Xi Jinping, which took place in Singapore, a neutral place, in the autumn 2015, a few months before he stepped down. Because it's an interesting meeting. It's a precedent in many ways. It's a precedent to what can happen if the Kuomintang comes back to power. It was the first time since 49 that both sides, met, and both presidents actually of two states which don't recognize each other.
Before that was Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong.
Yes, met in Chongqing.
meeting in Chongqing.
In 45, 46, yes. And so they met in Singapore, and of course they couldn't call each other president. Do you know how they call them?
领导.
先生, Ma 先生, Xi 先生, Mr. Ma, Mr. Xi. That was a bit weird, but I like the kind of artifice. But anyway, that's now. Of course, the meeting was criticized by the DPP. It was not, deemed as transparent enough. I mean, but the meeting itself didn't yield any real consensus actually, because they avoided to talk about political issues. Now Ma Ying-jeou was criticized not to have mentioned the Republic of China, and because of course, if you start mentioning, the other side would have mentioned there are the people of the Republic of China. I mean, so they avoided touchy issues. But that meeting took place. I think that's quite interesting. And
Ma Ying-jeou lost election.
No, Ma Ying-jeou had to retire, but his successor lost the election. Yes, clearly there was at the time a crisis in the KMT, and they changed horse in the middle of the ford. I mean, that was not good. Hong Xiuzhu was the first candidate, and then eventually it was Zhu Lilun, Eric Zhu, who became the official candidate. So it was lost to the election was lost to Tsai Ing-wen, and that's how the DPP came back to power in 2016. But actually, there's one thing that Ma Ying-jeou, at the end of his first term in 2011, tried to, he tested the water. It was a kind of a kite. He flew a kite, which was whether it was time to negotiate with Mainland China an end of hostility agreement. I say Mainland China, by the way, because that's the official qualification used by the Kuomintang, and it's still the name of the ministry dealing with Mainland China, with the PRC, which is, and the DPP never changed the name. It will not change the name. I don't think it will. It's unlikely it will change the name of that ministry in charge of, which is separate from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The MOFA is in charge of foreign affairs with other countries, the Waijiaobu, and the Lu Weihui is in charge of relations with China. Now, this end of hostility agreement issue was badly received by society, by the Kuomintang. They said, well, if you push that idea, you're going to lose the election of 2012. And he wanted to get re-elected in 2012. So he abandoned the idea. But because that's one of the objectives, actually, which both sides, the Kuomintang and the CCP, wants to reach, maybe down the road, to sort of finalize an end of hostility agreement. But it raised a lot of issues. Who's going to negotiate that? It cannot be an agreement between parties. It has to be an agreement between two states or two entities or whatever. And is it going to be accepted? And hostility, what kind of hostility you're referring to? So it's a box of war. I mean, so it's not an easy. But I mention it because later, Cheng Li-wun will also raise that issue, as we move to today's situation. So that's what happened under Ma Ying-jeou. So it's an interesting precedent. If it can give you an idea what would happen if the Kuomintang comes back to power.
And what was the dynamic of trade relations between the Mainland China and Taiwan during Ma Ying-jeou's 2 terms in office, compared to Chen Shui-bian era?
Well, I think it went on. Trading went on increasing, investment increased, more interaction. One of the big changes was the surge of Chinese tourism in Taiwan. So it went up to 4 million Chinese visitors in Taiwan in at the end of the Ma Ying-jeou era in 2015, I guess.
Some say that was also part of the reason why Kuomintang lost the elections in 2016. People had enough of crowds of tourists.
I mean, some industry, the service industry, have benefited from that. So there are some stakeholders, and today there are some those industries are putting pressure on William Lai to allow more tourists from China to come to Taiwan. But yes, I mean, it went a bit too far and
too fast,
and Taiwan is not that big. You know, when you have 4 million people from China. And the Taiwanese, they have to say, many Taiwanese prefer to have visitors from Korea or Japan because they're more friendly to the Taiwanese.
I mean, demanding.
Anyway, so that's how, you know. But that's what's quite interesting anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move to today because we have several issues. So now we have the third term of DPP president in power. So it was Tsai Ing-wen for 2 terms. Now we have Lai Ching-te, and. What is the idea of the Taiwanese government towards relations with China? How they view, like, how they should shape the relations? Because I understand that from the Chinese side, there is not that much of a change of the idea of what the relations should be like.
Yes, I mean China has been pretty steady. I mean, and predictable as far as Taiwan is concerned. I would start by indicating what, saying a few words about Tsai Ing-wen when she was elected in her inauguration speech, because she was very cautious. She didn't endorse the 92 consensus, but at the same time she acknowledged what happened in 92, and that there was been some negotiation between both sides in then, and she also endorsed the constitutional order of the ROC. So she was very much promoting the status quo and not rocking the boat at all. Now, China, after some time, after not much time, but reacted negatively to these overtures and said, "No, it's a half-finished exam. You haven't passed, so we won't talk to you." So the relationship is pretty bad since 2016, and since 2019, actually, China started to put more military pressure on Taiwan, and that has created more tensions, and clearly now starting to deny the existence of the medium line in the Taiwan Strait. So it means that the Chinese PLA fighters or a plane which cross the medium line and then return and trying to, and you have more and more of those operations now. Now, but one of the major objectives of Tsai Ing-wen and today Lai Ching-te is to reduce Taiwan dependence upon China from an economic point of view, and to encourage Taiwanese companies to invest in the South, in Southeast Asia and South Asia and elsewhere in the world. It's called the New Southbound Policy, which, by the way, was initiated and launched by Li Donghui as early in the 1970s, reactivated by Tsai Ing-wen after 2016. So now, how successful this policy has been? Well, if you look at the figures regarding Taiwan export to China, when she came to power in 2016, the amount of export to China represented 42% of Taiwanese export. Now it's around 22, so it has really been cut by half. But China will remain a major trade partner of China, and you see Chinese export to Taiwan increasing. So, but Taiwan still enjoys a big surplus with China still. So, but the countries which have benefited from that reorientation of Taiwan's foreign trade are actually Southeast Asia, but not so much South Asia. It's much more the U.S. actually. And now Trump complains about Taiwan because now the U.S. has a big trade deficit with Taiwan. So it means that the trade deficit we had with China has been now reoriented to other countries. Some of the trade deficits with Vietnam, with Mexico, and now with Taiwan, because many of the semiconductors are sold to the U.S. And now Trump, as you know, wants the Taiwanese and TSMC and other companies to invest more in the U.S. and produce less in Taiwan. So that's one of the side effect of this current situation. So that's been a major objective. Now, If there is one difference between Taiwan and Lai I would say William Lai has been less cautious, more direct. And one of the reasons he's been more direct than his predecessor is that the DPP has got really the feeling that Taiwan's caution has not paid off. You know, after 8 years of Taiwan, rather very cautious policy towards China, not hostile policy, China has been more and more hostile. So now, well, first of all, yes, William Lai has made the same commitment as Taiwan regarding China, the constitutional order, and so on. But at the same time, he has been much more vocal in saying the PRC and the ROC are not subordinated to each other. And that's something, of course, China is very unhappy with. Is very upset with, and that has led to more military intimidations, not only by the PLA Air Force, but also the PLA Navy, which tends to now go, navigate much around Taiwan and much closer to the Taiwanese, territorial waters than before. Now, these intimidations have reached some limits in the sense that they don't intrude into the airspace or the Taiwanese airspace or territorial waters, the 12 or even the 24 contiguous water, 24 nautical miles, which include the contiguous waters. So they stay outside, but they're getting near and near. And around after Nantendo was elected, there's been a number of incidents regarding the Kinmen Island. And now it looks like on some occasions, and that's concerning for the Taiwanese, on some occasions, the Chinese authorities, via the Coast Guards in particular, they tend to question the jurisdiction of Taiwan over the islands it administers, including Kinmen and Matsu. So they tend to enter those waters, restricted areas, to put pressure on the Taiwanese, to show them, they're unhappy with the situation, well, China's ambition is, objective is very clear. What they want to favor is the return of the Kuomintang to power, and that's how we can talk about Zhang Liwen's visit to China, because that's part of that.
Exactly. But before we do that, I want to ask you: Taiwanese society is a democratic society, so we have many different voices. So looking at these maybe 30 years of economic cooperation and of various initiatives of establishing and continuing a dialogue, what are the groups of the Taiwanese society that are mostly in favor of close relations with China? It's the big business?
Well, closer relation with China doesn't mean the end of the ROC.
Yes, of course.
And that's something we have to, because there is no one in Taiwan who will be in favor of diluting the ROC within the PRC. No one. And that's the big difference with Hong Kong. In Hong Kong and Macau, there was no sovereignty issue. It was clear that Hong Kong and Macau were, after the handover, part of China, the PRC. The question is what degree of autonomy they could enjoy. And Hong Kong enjoyed a quite high degree of autonomy, at least until 2020, when the national security law was introduced for Hong Kong. So that's a big difference with Taiwan. Big business, yes, some businesses still have a vested interest in developing closer or at least stable relations with China. But this is changing. Now, regarding and we have to look at opinion polls here, because there are two issues here. Of course, one is with the military tensions increasing in the Strait. The question is, of course, we have to talk about the risk of war and how much the Taiwanese society is ready to a war, to fight against an invader if they have an invasion, or a blockade if there is a blockade around Taiwan. And that led the Taiwan administration, actually, when Taiwan was still present, to extend the drafting, the military service, from 4 months. It has been reduced to 4 months by Ma Ying-jeou, because of détente. They said, China is not hostile, not going to invade us, back to 1 year. Now, some people argue that 1 year is not enough. 1 year only for men, by the way. And but still, it's and then that's the first step in the direction of making Taiwan's defense more stronger, more credible, and increasing Taiwan's deterrence against a risk of invasion or military attack from China. The other question, of course, is the military budget, and there's ongoing discussion and debates in Taiwan and how much
blockages in the parliament.
And blockages by the KMT and its allies in the parliament. But within the Kuomintang and the current situation, there is a big division among factions. How much the budget should be, the increase should be, so that's another issue. But
so I understand that now all sides agree to a 12 million purchases of American military equipment, but they don't agree to DPP's idea of creating a Taiwanese dome, which is like a 40...
Yes, I mean, that depends on the items, but, okay. Because it depends on the U.S. I mean, first of all, you have to introduce the U.S. factor. The Trump administration, it started with Biden, actually. It's been going on for some time. The U.S. is worried about the lack of preparedness of Taiwanese armed forces to a conflict in the Taiwan Strait. And they want the Taiwanese to be more serious about security, about their own defense, to invest more in their...
a naive question. So why are they worried about Taiwan preparedness if they want to contain all Taiwanese activity that might endanger the status quo in the Strait?
Because they want to protect the status quo, and there is an assumption in the U.S. that and that's something we see. We have to introduce another factor, which is Xi Jinping himself. Since Xi Jinping was elected, in 2012, there is an impression that he wants to speed up unification. Well, he said clearly, I mean, it's not an impression, it's a fact that he said clearly that you don't want to leave that question unsolved to the next generation. So he wants that his generation solve the issue. What does it mean by solving the issue? Did it mean full-fledged unification, turning Taiwan into a new special administrative region of the PRC or something else? We don't know, but still, the pressure is there. And the military pressure is really intensifying. There is no doubt about that. So the U.S. is worried because the U.S., as you know, has a very ambiguous relationship with Taiwan since the de-recognition in '79. Actually, very soon after the normalization between Washington D.C. and Beijing, the U.S. Congress adopted, maybe you've never heard of that law, called the Taiwan Relations Act, in April '79, which is a very important document because it's an act of the Congress which organizes the relations between the people of the United States and the people of Taiwan. They don't talk about the state because Taiwan for the U.S. officially is not a state. It includes that the relationship includes some economic, cultural, and other relations. The other type of relation includes also military relations. So the irony is that you've got two people two states who don't recognize each other having and I have to say very close military cooperation, particularly between the Pentagon and the Taiwanese armed forces. So that's the irony of the situation. And so in the Taiwan Relations Act, there's a provision which compels the U.S. to supply Taiwan with defensive weapons, and also to consider any challenge to the status quo and to the security of Taiwan as a subject of grave concern for the United States. So it means that if it's not an alliance, it's very hard for the U.S. not to intervene if Taiwan is in danger. Of course, the U.S. has stuck to a policy of what has been called strategic ambiguity, which is to say we won't tell you what we will do if there is a war in the Taiwan Strait, but we keep all options open. Now, as long as the military balance was very much in favor of the United States, the issue was not that pressing. But now the military balance between the PRC and China and the U.S., between the PLA Navy and the U.S. Navy, is changing to the benefit of the former. So for the U.S., the situation is much more concerning as it used to be, and that's why they need to see the Taiwanese be much more alert and much more aware of what they can do, and what they want. I mean, not only the American, but also the Taiwanese military wants to put together a kind of what I would call a credible conventional deterrence power. So to compel the other side, the Chinese, to think twice before starting a war against Taiwan, because the price of that war would be too high. So that's the idea of deterrence, actually, including the conventional deterrence, because there is no way for Taiwan to resume a nuclear program, military nuclear program, which they were tempted to develop in the 70s and the 80s, but which was cut by the Americans, the American for them to put an end to that program. So that's where we are, and of course the KMT will argue that if we have détente in the Strait, we don't need to invest so much in defense. At the same time, which is quite interesting, they're not opposed to improving Taiwan's defense capability, not only to please the American, but also to be more credible and to also protect Taiwan in the longer run. So, but the DPP suspect that among the KMT politicians and MPs, Member of Parliament, there are really some who are betraying Taiwan, because they want to disarm Taiwan, which is Beijing's objective, of course, is to make sure that Taiwan is going to be disarmed, because Beijing objects to any kind of arms sale to Taiwan, be it from the US or another country. So that's where we are, and what is interesting is that the KMT today is divided. It's not really about, well, the dome you mentioned, yes, of course, because it's very costly. But there was a compromise of 4 major weapon systems that the U.S. had promised Taiwan, and they had to sign that agreement earlier this year if they wanted to keep that, approved on the U.S. side. So they approved the sale of those weapon systems, but without having the budget yet. So the budget needs to be approved now. And then you have the overall extra budget for the coming years is submitted by the DPP, goes up to $40 billion, which is a lot of money for Taiwan. Yes. It's twice the amount of the annual defense budget, actually.
Yes, so 40 billion for the dome and 12 billion for the sale of American weapons.
Yes, well, 11 billion at the end of last year was committed by the US, and an additional 20 should be in the pipeline and should be announced by the Trump administration after his visit to China, if this visit takes place on the 14th and 15th of May this year.
Okay,
10 days from now.
Yeah, we don't have much time, and I really wanted to focus on what was actually the topic or the title of this meeting. So let's go to Cheng Li-wun now. So she has been elected as the new head of the KMT, a powerful female politician. She went to mainland China. She met with Xi Jinping. She met with all the main people, Li Qiang, etc. And my question to you is there any specific idea of how the relations could actually develop? And let's say the KMT wins the next election. They have the president, they have the government, maybe Cheng Li-wun, maybe somebody else. Do they have any new idea of how the relations could shape?
I think by and large, if the KMT comes back to power in 2028, I think it would be a return to the Ma Ying-jeou's years. I don't think they have any additional idea.
So it's all somewhere along the lines of a status quo. Closer to China, further away to China, more facing China, more turning the back to China and facing Southeast Asia, but basically a status quo. Any idea for anything else?
They will I think within the problem with the KMT is divided. So Cheng Li-wun was elected because she belongs to a younger generation of politicians. Well, I have to mention that she, before joining the KMT 20 years ago and joining Lianzhan to China in 2005, for quite a long time she was a DPP politician. And her father is from Yunnan, belongs to the Yi minority, Yunnan. Her mother is Taiwanese, so She's very vocal and she has a strong personality. But whether she will be the KMT candidate in 28 remains to be seen, because there are other candidates in the offing, and including someone who is pretty powerful and better connected than to the local communities, who is Lu Xiuyan, who is Taichung mayor. So, and who is more moderate and more middle of the road than Zhang Li-wun. Zhang Li-wun's problem when she went to China, she ticked a number of boxes, but at the same time she went a bit too far, even further than Ma Ying-jeou, in making, endorsing the narrative promoted by the Communist Party on the renaissance of the Chinese civilization, on the common destiny of mankind. I mean, she went a bit too far in that direction, and that I don't think that was very wise. But clearly, provided on the plus side, she didn't mention unification. She mentioned the ROC from an historical point of view when she went to pay respect to Sun Yat-sen in Nanjing, to the tomb of Sun Yat-sen, which in Nanjing city. And she kept talking about stabilization, improving cross-strait relations, and peace, actually. The idea was with the Kuomintang back in power, there will be less hostility, and then we will return to détente and kind of peace. Peace is possible. So we attached to that, we maybe need to invest. We don't need to invest as much in as defense as the DPP. So the accusation, actually, from the KMT point of view and from Zhang Li-wun's point of view, is that the DPP is the force destabilizing the cross-strait relations. Why? I mean, you can argue from the DPP point of view, it's more the Mainland China, PRC, which is destabilizing cross-strait relations, putting military pressure on Taiwan, and so on. So now the question is whether she can keep, because she's the new chairwoman of the KMT, she can keep the KMT together, united on major issues. We know that on the defense budget they are divided. There are 2 or 3 groups actually. And they are in a, actually William Lai himself is in a weaker position, I should have mentioned that earlier, than his predecessor, like Taiwan, because he doesn't control the parliament anymore. So he needs to compromise, and the DPP group in the parliament needs to compromise with the KMT, and the third party, which is Coendra's party in the middle, but which on most votes has aligned with the Kuomintang. So that's the situation today. That's why the Kuomintang is taking advantage of that to push its envelope and promote its own policy regarding China, but also regarding defense issues. But again, it's not a done deal because the KMT is divided, and we have to see whether it can remain united on major issues, and whether it can make a good score in the coming local election at the end of November this year. So that's going to be the first test.
First question was about the scheduled meeting between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, and whether there would be important things that are discussed in the meeting concerning Taiwan.
Okay, well, the meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping, if it takes place on the 14th and the 15th of May, we'll have to address a lot of issues. Sometimes, observers have summarized the items which they're going to be discussed in 3 T's: taxes, technology, and Taiwan. On taxes and technology, I think that the Trump administration can make some concessions to China, lowering the taxes, giving access to more U.S. technologies. On Taiwan, it's unlikely that actually the Trump administration is going to make any concession to the Chinese side. Now, we have to remember that after Trump came back to the White House in January 2025, very, very early on the website of the State Department, the decision was made to delete the sentence according to which the United States doesn't encourage Taiwan independence. So it's been deleted. And the reason it's been deleted is that actually, according to the State Department, it doesn't add anything to the One China policy. The One China policy include that idea. Now, what the Chinese government would like from the Trump administration is a clear opposition to Taiwan independence, that the U.S. opposes Taiwan independence. So I don't think they're going to get that concession. What they may get is a very kind of general statement according to which the U.S. oppose any change to the status quo, which is not peaceful, which is not agreed by both sides, which is coincide with also the European Union's policy towards China and Taiwan. So I don't think it will go further. And of course, what China would like also to get is some caution in terms of arms sales to Taiwan. Maybe less arms sales, but again, I don't think they will get much. Trump from the U.S., because Trump has been cautious not to announce any additional arms sales since the one announced in December last year. But I can tell you that there will be additional arms sales made public later in the year. Maybe another $20 billion of arms sales to Taiwan.
Wow. If the U.S. can produce that much,
yes,
that many arms, that's the biggest problem now for the U.S. Indeed. They're using a lot.
In the Middle East, yes, you're right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Totally not my area of expertise, but I'm just curious, what's your opinion on the line that Taiwan cannot cross? Or China will attack?
Okay.
Any line?
Yes.
So the question is whether there is any absolute red line that Taiwan cannot cross, otherwise it will be attacked by China. Is there any specific red line?
Well, formal declaration of independence, the revival of a military nuclear program. There will be 2 casus belli. So that the 2 obvious, reasons for China to attack. Short of that, my assumption is that China would prefer to remain with what we call the gray zones, which is to put military pressure on Taiwan without going beyond the threshold of war. And and don't forget a blockade is an act of war. A quarantine, there's been discussion in the U.S. whether China will opt for a quarantine, because a quarantine won't be an act of war, will be more within the limits of the gray zone strategy. We can debate about that, but even a quarantine seems to me rather unlikely to me. But military pressure, yes, and as long as the DPP is in power, of course, and so that's where we are.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, please.
So I want to ask if Taiwan crosses the red line, do you think that China right now is prepared for a war with Taiwan? And if that war happens, for example, if China takes Taiwan in like 2-3 days, would the USA go in to
retaliate? Yeah. Okay. So this question is about. Is China militarily prepared to attack Taiwan? And if yes, what could be the possible scenarios? Will Taiwan fall very quickly, and will the U.S. come to aid in the defense?
Well, the U.S. and Taiwan have worked on that for many years. I think the most likely scenario as we speak today, because the most feasible scenario for China in terms of armed action against Taiwan would be a blockade. Now the question how long you can hold the blockade, and what is the objective of the blockade? Of course, is to get concessions from the Taiwanese side. A full-fledged invasion of Taiwan today remains out of reach. For how long, I don't know, but it's a very complicated operation for a number of reasons. Taiwan is an island, very few beaches where you can you can set up a beachhead and a landing operation. And then, Taiwan is not defenseless. So, to reach Taiwan, you need to secure some space, and it takes a lot of casualties. And so there's been some scenarios elaborated by some U.S. think tanks that even without the U.S., the first days of confrontation will be very bloody, and actually there will be a lot of casualties on both sides. Now, of course, you're alluding to this kind of race. You have to sort of, on the Chinese side, the interest will be, or the objective would be to impose on the U.S. a fait accompli, and it would be too late for the U.S. to intervene. But the Taiwanese are also preparing to that scenario and trying to hold on, at least alone, before any U.S. naval intervention for at least 2 weeks to 1 month, which will allow the U.S. Navy to move closer to the strait and to Taiwan. So that's part of the scenarios which have been on which the U.S. have been working. So, but again, even a war which will involve the U.S. and China will be also very costly for both sides, and that is kind of even before moving to some nuclear level. So, because there are risks of nuclearization of such a war between two nuclear powers, but even before that, if the war remains, within the conventional limits, that can be also very bloody for both sides, which is a kind of a dissuasion against war in a sense. So that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one last question. Anyone? Go ahead. So the question is about how young people view the situation in Taiwan and China, and whether they can influence how politics is shaped in between the two entities. Yes,
it's quite, a number of things we can say about young people in Taiwan. Of course, the young men will be the ones. If there is a war, they were the ones who will be directly affected by the war. So their will to fight is maybe not as strong as the average will to fight, in case of war among the Taiwanese society. So that's according to opinion polls provided by a number of institutions. That's pretty clear, because but still, the smaller majority of them will be ready to fight. Now, what is interesting is a recent poll has indicated actually. It's not only young people, but most Taiwanese. There are more Taiwanese endorsing the 92 consensus than opposing the 92 consensus. So it's kind of 40% to 30%, plus 20% who don't know what to think about. So it's quite interesting, because there is a trend now which is not to doubt about the U.S., because there is a group of people among the dark blue who promoted the idea that the Taiwan shouldn't rely on the U.S. They call Mainland. But I don't think it's a very, very strong idea. It's not that shared idea among Taiwanese. But the idea that the 92 consensus will be a guarantee against hostility or higher degree of tension is something which is taking traction among the Taiwanese, including among young people. So that's something we need to observe for the future. Of course, the DPP is opposed to that, but that's maybe one of the consequences of the achievements, in the sense of Cheng Li-wun's visit, is to show that if you endorse the 92 consensus, maybe actually there is less risk of war, and maybe it's possible to talk about, to sort of restore, at least to stabilize relations across the Taiwan Strait, and I would say, as far as unification is concerned, to kick the can down the road, so to postpone any kind of unification in the longer term. So without really mentioning it, and Cheng Li-wun was careful enough not to mention unification, but of course China would like to see unification as a possibility in the longer term, but for the time being, it's much more stable relations between two entities which don't recognize each other, which stick to one China principle, but which have de facto government-to-government relations. So that's where we are. And young people, yes, maybe may change in the longer run, but provided that they can still, promote their own identity. And I don't think that the Taiwanese identity as such is going to disappear. And Cheng Li-wun took a risk in promoting a Chineseness. Yes, of course, everyone is culturally Chinese in Taiwan because they speak Mandarin, and they use Chinese characters, they eat Chinese food, and so on and so forth. But in terms of political or civic identity, they feel Taiwanese. And I don't think that the young people will feel less Taiwanese than the older one. Actually, they're even more Taiwanese than the people who, who grew up under Chiang Kai-shek and Chiang Ching-kuo, who were, educated as Chinese from Taiwan rather than Taiwanese. So that's where we are.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for lots of information about Taiwan, about the politics and some intricacies in mainland China-Taiwanese relations. Thank you very much. Our guest was Professor Jean-Pierre Cabestan, and thank you very much for visiting SWPS University.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.